on cone of fire stuff. It's been about a week now since I made my thread on the main Planet Side 2 subreddit about an issue I discovered that seems to have appeared sometime after a late afternoon hotfix on the 5th of April, otherwise known as the ASP Patch Deployment Day. The thread now sits at about 8,000 some odd views and, to my surprise, an 87% upvote rate. I didn't actually expect it to get that much attention, seeing as though it seems a large portion of the community seems to be ultimately not really caring much about gunplay in the game. I even got a dev response that I was looking for, although it was a complete and total joke and did absolutely nothing to dispel what people were actually seeing. It was nice to see anyway, and a good reminder that if you draw attention to something wrong in the game in a certain way, you'll get their attention, good or bad. To be honest, I probably wouldn't have even posted the thread had the issue been addressed on some medium in any meaningful way. I'll get more into how Rel went about addressing it later on. Whether or not the change was made intentionally doesn't matter at this point. Whatever changed is in the game, and as of a week later is still functioning in the same manner, and basically everybody has stuck their heads in the sand and moved on, change and all. Now, I feel like I have to explain why good players shot the weapons in the game the way they did first. I spent probably about almost 2 years playing the game prior to joining AC. In this time, I was probably your average 2KD shitter with either middling or poor accuracy, and I almost never aimed for the head. I mag dumped a lot. Not because it was accurate, but because of desperation. It's just that even as desperate as I was to maybe eke out that kill, the method in which I was trying to get it wasn't going to let me do it. No matter how hard I held that button down, I only became more inaccurate. The game's gunplay was very unrewarding for me, and I held basically every bad player mindset and belief that you can have for this game. I stumbled upon Visigoto's gameplay clips and found myself in awe of the efficiency and skill of just insta-giving someone with headshots. In all of his clips I saw at this time, it was like the cleanest thing I'd ever seen in the game in terms of killing another dude. It was eye-opening for me. I began to inquire in-game to him about some settings, mouse-type stuff, and ultimately we ended up becoming friends, and I ended up in the outfit. To understand better, you have to realize that AC was a rather small outfit. You were never going to be able to brute force a point cap or something with numbers. We understood that in order for a smaller force to be able to go toe-to-toe with some Zerg force, every individual member needed to be roughly worth 3 or 4 of the enemy, since those were generally the odds we would ultimately end up facing the majority of the time. So the question becomes, how do I become a more efficient killer? Visigoto, Maximum, Smurf, Kylan, and a bunch of other guys already had the answer, and it primarily centered around gunplay. The game is relatively slow-paced and has very innately accurate weapons. The key to success was to be able to kill a single individual player in the minimum TTK available to an automatic weapon. Headshots were the answer, and specifically chain headshots. An alpha damage burst of chain headshots fired accurately enough and tracked well enough can kill a single player a lot of the time before they can even react to the damage, and this allows you to either transition to the next closest target faster or move on from the area. Some things you have to account for in this way of shooting is positioning, crosshair placement, target acquisition, recoil control, and cone of fire control. You have to position yourself in a manner that gives you an ideal angle on where you intend your gunfight to take place, as well as preferably having a quick out. Your crosshair placement has to be head level or about wherever your weapon's natural recoil impulse and first shot multiplier kick you into the head hitbox. Your target acquisition for a single player entering your field of view has to be almost immediate, and you need to not overshoot or undershoot. You need to be dead on. Recoil control is simply accounting for whether the weapon has some angle of pull by pulling on the mouse. Cone of fire control is last, but probably just as important as everything else I just mentioned combined. When firing most closer range-oriented automatic weapons and aiming at someone's head, your cone of fire bloom is generally going to make you start missing shots, if everything else is perfect, around the 5th or 6th shot. After the 5th or 6th shot, it was necessary to reset your cone by pausing, redoing everything else, and then firing again until the target was dead. If you ended up having to finish with body shots, you can safely double the amount of shots in your burst to end up with very high hit rate on the body, assuming you're doing everything else correctly. So, we basically ended up with a gunplay metagame of 5 to 6 at the head, 8 to 12 towards the body, if need be. After both of these upper numbers, your cone of fire had bloomed to a point where if you continued to fire, you almost certainly wouldn't have any type of accuracy advantage over even the most basic opponent any longer, and remember, the whole point of this shooting methodology is to dispatch standard players as quickly as possible to run through their ranks. Now, going for that alpha damage headshot gib is inherently risky as you're firing an automatic weapon at the smallest part of the target in a game that has relatively janky movement. There's a distinct risk versus reward thing going on here, and if you put together all of those aspects of the engagement I listed previously and end up killing the guy before he can react, you get an awesome feeling, and you get to survive taking little or no damage to move on to the next engagement. By no means did it always work all the time, but as you slowly improved and modified the way you did things here and there and practiced, you were rewarded for it. You very quickly killed people and could often clear almost entire rooms of players simply because you practiced a skilled, nuanced way to use your weapon. Players that mag dumped at you? You laughed at them because you knew that you would almost always beat them because of how hard they had bloomed their weapons. The same can be said of those morons that continue to say that suppression exists in some form in this game from a single player with a single gun. These people were basically free kills because of the gunplay of the game punished you for having a mouth breather style gameplay of just holding mouse 1 at everything. It was nice. In a game full of skill gap equalizers and tons of other shit that removes skill from almost every equation of gameplay, you could always come back to the infantry gunplay of the game and be rewarded for skill and nuance. And then, they changed it. Perhaps not even in a way that most players would notice, and quite simply most players honestly wouldn't notice, but when you play the game, as I just detailed in the previous section, when the style of gunplay you specifically avoided playing with becomes suddenly viable overnight, it's hard to hide. When people that don't even bother bursting their weapons all of a sudden insta-nuke you with little or no effort, something has changed. Over the past week, I've done a little mental retraining on the way I approach the gunfights in this game. Target at 10 meters, hold mouse 1. Target at 20 meters, hold mouse 1. Target at 30 meters, hold mouse 1. 40, 50 meters, hold mouse 1. Now the problem with doing this before was after an initial burst of accuracy, you would rather quickly become inaccurate and you would have to do at least some kind of moderate bursting, especially out to further ranges. Now, not so much. The cone of fire bloom seems to be either retarded 50% in the first half or so of the magazine, or just halved in general. I can find no other way to describe how I can retain 100% hit rate on a man-sized target at nearly every single relevant range, firing an absurd amount of bullets compared to what you used to be able to fire. The problem is even bigger in sub-20 meter engagements, which I contest is the most relevant range for infantry combat in the game. Most infantry engagements will start and end somewhere between 0 and 20 meters. Of course, the developer doesn't ever feel inclined to provide any of this relevant and important information when it comes to gunplay because it seems as though they are relatively disinterested in the FPS portion of the game, but I digress. Quite frankly, at 20 meters and in now, there is absolutely no reason to burst fire an LMG, assault rifle, or carbine. If you can track and control recoil, just mag dump. Am I a 40% general accuracy shooter on the T9 Carve? Nope. But I am now, and it isn't because I magically improved and got better last Thursday. A lot of people have come out of the woodwork saying that they notice absolutely nothing different in shooting the weapons, at which point I have to ask exactly what kind of player they are. I've had multiple people link me to videos of the tests they're trying to tell me that they notice no difference in shooting the weapons, and judging by all the video responses I've received testing the weapons, I honestly have to say that the majority of the responses I've gotten don't even understand the issue I'm describing, and there's no actual way for me to describe it any clearer. A guy from EU linked me to a bunch of weapon tests he did, and 2 minutes into the video I could already identify the very issue that I was talking about in the initial post. I'm seeing a lot of players fundamentally misunderstand a very obvious and clearly cut issue. It's beyond frustrating. I feel like I shouldn't have to explain to someone who at least pretends to be knowledgeable or good at the game that you shouldn't have nearly 100% hit rate on a 40-meter target with a butcher 40 rounds into a mag dump. I'm not sure if you're just being willfully obtuse because you don't like me, or you're just honestly that ignorant. I think I misjudged a lot of players and assumed we were all operating on the same knowledge base of common understandings for weapons in the game and how they work, but this last week has showed me that this isn't the case at all. Now, this isn't all players. The amount of people that are actually in agreement and fundamentally understand what is and isn't right with the weapons they've used for countless hours over the last few years far outweighs the vapid refutations of the ignorant few. Now, to respond to the REL response, which I hesitate to even call it a response, let's begin with the timeline. The ASP update on 5 April. All PC servers will be taken offline for an update at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Thursday, April 5th, 2018. So the servers go down. I'm not sure when they initially came back up, as I didn't even play on the 5th because, well, I thought it was common knowledge to avoid playing on patch days. And I don't, generally. So the servers came back up at some point, I don't know when. People played and discovered crazy, horrible sound bugs, etc. And then at 4:43 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Nick Silva announced that all PC servers will be taken offline for an update at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, midnight UTC. Expected downtime is less than 2 hours. So what does this have to do with the video that Rel linked explaining that Cone of Fire was fine? Well, according to the timestamp of the video and the Windows date and time information from even the bottom right of his desktop, one could imagine that this video was recorded on the 5th of April at 12:53 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also, the issue of being super accurate further into a magazine is not even addressed in the gameplay footage. Firing 10 rounds doesn't even address what I'm talking about. Don't you think it's strange that Rel would be recording a video showing that Cone of Fire is fine before a hotfix that came 4 hours later and almost 24 hours before anyone even made a thread or a comment related to the Cone of Fire being weird? I think that's kind of odd, and if you don't understand why that makes sense, I'd ask you to kindly remove your nose from his ass and stop being a moron. The build in the video that he has there is apparently version 1.0.997.385.221 release x64, which by the time of the thread is not even the same build we're playing on and seeing the issues. I feel like there is some intent to deceive here, and it's actually kind of funny how stupid you would have to be to leave 2 examples of an obvious timestamp on your GIF that supposedly refutes a huge gunplay issue. I think it's also important to note that since this quote-unquote evidence of Cone of Fire being fine video is wholly refuted as being relevant to the current build of the game and refuted directly to the source of the video, Rel himself, we haven't seen anything. Wouldn't it be super easy as a developer to just hop on and repeat the same exact test you just did on the actual build of the game we're playing on? Wouldn't that be rather easy? I imagine if I was a developer of a first-person shooter title, I'd want to be out there and show definitive proof that we didn't change the gunplay. But then again, I'm interested in being honest and not shoehorning skill gap compression into my game. So, there's that. Now I'll ask you, the viewer, what do you think is more likely? That basically the entirety of the infantry players in the game that have 2 working hemispheres of the brain came together to form the biggest prank of all time in the game, or that a development team that has had 0 interest in skill-based gameplay attempted to sneak in a form of skill gap compression in a game already rife with it? Yes, it's some prank that I can just mindlessly run around now, mag dumping everyone and hit 40% accuracy on almost every weapon without even trying to be efficient. If only all pranks were so rewarding. I would go further into my encounters with serious gaming on this issue, as we directly talked about it, but that is a topic for another video on his idea that skill disparities ruin games. God. Anyway, I'll link the threads and everything pertinent to what I've said on here in the description. I wanted to get something out there in my own words that kind of deals with what we're talking about here and the things I think were important to discuss regarding it. Have fun and keep mag dumping.